Divers and people who spend a lot of time underwater, what's the creepiest, most unexplainable thing you've seen while in the depths? When I was a kid we used to go to a place during the summer holiday which had some very nice beaches and in particular an estuary with a very wide river mouth. One summer there was a king tide where enough of the water emptied out of the river into the ocean that you could snorkel quite easily from one side of the river mouth to the other, as it got so shallow that it was only a meter or so deep at the deepest part. One day I decided to snorkel across from one beach to the one on the other side of the river, and about halfway across where the depth to the bottom was maybe half a meter, I was swimming along the surface looking down with my mask snorkel on, and a massive stingray passed directly underneath me. This thing was easily 2 meters across, covered in white scars and missing its tail. I just froze in the water and it felt like my heart stopped. If I had let my breath out, I would have dropped in the water low enough that I would have landed on it. It was so close. I wasn't in any danger, but having a massive creature appear so unexpectedly, so close up, was absolutely terrifying. To clear up some confusion, the stinger also gone, just a sort of torn partial stump left of the tail. Something very similar happened to me snorkeling in Hanoma Bay in Oahu, paddling along, having the time of my life, when a massive dark shape emerged in the distance. Before I knew it, it was sailing right under me. I sucked it in because I was afraid it would graze my belly. Turned out to be an absolutely monstrous sea turtle. It was about the size of a mattress. Exhilarating and terrifying. 2 biggest. My buddy was taking pictures. He wanted one of me surrounded by a school of fish, so I started tossing out small pieces of hot dog. I was immediately surrounded by so many perch, I couldn't see out. All of a sudden, a bass snagged one of the pieces of hot dog that was maybe 6 inches from my face. My mask blocked his approach. Scared the crap out of me. Second one was a night dive in very silty water. Visibility was less than 3 featuring lowest eye mark. If I can't see my outstretched arm, it is less than 3 feet. We were near a flooded structure, maybe an old water tank. At about 35 feet, something was flashing from our lights. Suddenly, I'm covered in something and I couldn't see my light reflecting back. I pull it off my face, but it is still black and I can feel it touching the top of my head. I try over and over to free myself, but I don't feel caught, just covered. Finally, I get clear. It was a large plastic trash bag. Keep your trash out of the water, please. One of our assistant instructors got bit on the head and dragged 5 featuring or so by a bass at Casino Point while feeding the fish peas on our safety stop. He came out bleeding from his head and everyone thought he hit his head on the reef. On a night dive in Scripps Canyon, a cormorant rammed directly into my dive light at high speed and knocked itself unconscious. I thought it was dead but gently brought it back to the surface where it woke up and took off. As much of a shock that must have been, this made me laugh. And that you helped an injured bird made me AWW. Got charged by a mother humpback. Her curious calf had swum around us and we were between her and the calf. 2 of us never saw it coming. We were watching the baby, but our third diver watched her come. She kicked down and swam under us last minute. We didn't see anything until that 60 feet freight train passed just underneath us. You just narrowly avoided getting Finding Nemo'd. Rescue recovery diver here. Every time I've recovered a drowning victim I get the creeps. Unfortunately, a lot of people are under the impression that every underwater environment is like the movies and there's absolute clarity. That's rarely the case. One evening I got called out for a young girl that jumped from a bridge. She likely survived the fall and entry. We have a morbid term for what happened to her upon hitting the water. Plugged. I found her with a surprising amount of visibility and relatively shallow water. She was stuck in the mud to just below her knees, and you could see the fear locked into her eyes face. There's nothing peaceful about suicide by bridge. I dropped my goggles and was trying to reach down in the river and grab it, but I pulled out a sheep's skull by its sockets. Wasn't as creepy in hindsight, but 10-year-old me was scared. Wasn't as creepy in hindsight, my butt. I got told a story once by a Maori language teacher of mine during my time at high school. We didn't learn much Maori, just listened to stories. A dam in the Waikato, New Zealand had begun to have visible cracks in the concrete on the outside part of the dam, and some drivers were organized to dive down and check the inside submerged part of the dam for damage on that side. While they were down there was the usual debris you would find behind a man-made wall which prevents the water from flowing as it would normally do if there wasn't a dam there. Turns out what they thought were large logs were in fact huge eels which had gotten to the size of logs due to being prevented from migrating to the sea, where they breed and die. So from being prevented from doing their natural life duties they just get larger and larger. That would be creepy seeing eels deep down in the water just floating around. The shrieking eels from The Princess Bride are the most terrifying thing ever to me. That fear has stuck into my adult life because no one has ever been able to tell me if they were fake or real eels used in the filming. My brain just can't deal with eels. You can dive in man-made lakes and check out what's left of old flooded homes and communities. It's pretty dark and spooky down there no matter what, especially when you think of all the big fish swimming around that are barely silhouettes until they're close. My buddy likes to dive in lakes. He said the creepiest thing, by far, is finding cemeteries 100 featuring and beneath the water in the dark, eerie quiet. I asked him about big fish. He said there's definitely crap down there bigger than he expected, 4 or 5 feet. They're attracted to the lights and noise but watch from a distance, which is nonetheless disconcerting. Just dark, 2D shapes drifting nearby. None of the monsters other folks are bringing up though. Someone just dove to the bottom of our lake to check a drain and now he won't go back under cause he said he saw a fish that could swallow him whole, lol. 20 plus feet long he said. I had a dive master that told me once he was diving somewhere and found a full skeleton wearing diving gear with the air on the tank turned off pretty deep down. If I remember correctly they said they reported it to the police and it was found out the man's wife turned off his air while they were on a dive to murder him. A co-worker of mine goes cave diving and says that while not super common, you do find dead bodies in swim gear in caves sometimes. People either go too far into the cave and then run out of oxygen on the way back, or they squeeze past a tight gap and get stuck on the other side, unable to come back the way they came. I dive myself but heard this story from a Garda diver. In 2010 a man took a test drive in a car with a salesman and in a suicide attempt he drove the car off the pier into the sea and drowned. The salesman managed to escape by breaking the window and swimming to the surface. The divers were dispatched to retrieve the other man's body. This isn't in the news report which I have a link to below for anyone interested. Simply through working in marinas at the time I was able to be part of the conversation with the diver in question. When he got to the car, he said, the man was still facing forward, hands on the steering wheel, eyes wide. He'd been there a couple of hours now. Where it gets creepy is when the diver opened the driver door. This combined with the smashed window caused the currents to flow through the car and the man's wide-eyed head turned around slowly with the force of it to face the diver. When living off the coast some buddies and I would take regular fishing trips out to the oil rigs. We would always have some lines out and a few would dive down and try to spear some mangrove snapper or cobia. Once while I and 2 others were diving down checking out the structure we decided we needed to move due to lack of life around the rig. We all get back in the boat and as one of my buddies is reeling in a line we had a red snapper baited on, an easily 8-10 feet tiger shark starts chewing on it right behind the prop. So close I could have poked his eye out. The idea that massive animal was in the water so close to me and 2 of my friends but no one saw it is terrifying. I bet he was watching us the whole time. And that's why you didn't see any other fish in the area. Not unexplainable, but gave the a bit of a fright. I worked as a commercial diver for about 7 years in the UK and also some work in Europe. I was working in Orkney, north of Scotland, on the fish farms. One time I swam down one of the bigger nets off Rousay and it was very dark, very overgrown, and I could see some weird shapes lying in the dead man's sock as I descended. There were a few more dead fish than usual, maybe 100 or so, but underneath them were lying 3 dead seals. Big ones. It was hard to make out because they were covered in fish but one of the seals had a big freaking chunk of it missing. And that's when I looked up and saw a 4-foot tear in the side of the net. Frick that. I was only a newbie at this point. Fish farm work is generally the best way to start a diving career. Doesn't pay the best but you get plenty of minutes logged which helps for experience. I told the supervisor who said get out straight away. They sent one of the more experienced lads in after me and he fixed the whole sharpish and then rigged the seals up to be lifted out. Turns out the seals had been killed by orca and somehow got through the net in a panic. Orca are quite common up in Orkney and are the only animal we were told you had to get out the water for if seen. Only one of the seals had a bite mark. The other two got caught in the net. Not supernatural or anything, but I remember a significant shiver running down my spine that day. Why orcas? I was told by one of the marine environment lads who used to regularly come out on the boats with us that it's a precautionary thing. Wearing black neoprene and fins, you may be mistaken for a seal and become breakfast. To be fair, it's a precaution I was very happy to go along with. We don't get great whites or tiger sharks up here, but I'd imagine in South Africa, India, Australia etc. there would be similar rules. It's disconcerting being reminded that you are not the apex predator in the vicinity. An old World War II ammunition ship off the south coast of England was full of brass-topped shells. Most had been taken by divers over the years and it was now very rare to see them, apart from a pile in one corner of the ship. This pile of shiny brass metals was miraculous untouched and remarkably clean after spending years underwater, and you only found out why if you swam near then. Out of the murky darkness, the largest eel I have ever seen snakes forward. Without exaggeration, this thing had a head the same size as a horse's head, full of jagged teeth. I could not see the body as it looped into the dark and deeper into the ship. No one got near those shells. Turns out for years this thing had been guarding the shiny brass shells, slithering over them making them shine. We found out at the bar later that he was famous in the area and many people went to the wreck just to see him. No idea why this giant creature was guarding them like a dragon and its horde, but some said eels are like magpies and like shiny things. It has been pointed out it was probably a conger eel, not a Murray. I'm honestly not sure as it was years ago and very dark. I have updated accordingly. When I was a kid swimming in the lake at summer camp, I dove underwater and I swear I saw someone in scuba gear hiding underneath the dock watching us. I told the lifeguard, but he wasn't able to find anyone. I'm a commercial diver and was once on a job cleaning a potable water reservoir. I'd been in other reservoirs before, but this was by far the biggest, at 40x 80 meters. To get in you had to open a hatch in the ground. The whole reservoir was underground and climb down a ladder. The hatch was in a corner, so when you were in the far corner of the reservoir, it was completely pitch black, and you just had to hope your light didn't go out. I was about halfway through a 3-hour dive when the batteries in my torch started going flat. I watched the beam get narrower and dimmer until it cut out completely. It's not a huge problem if you lose light, as you can just follow your umbilical back to the hatch. Just as I started walking back, some obnoxiously loud banging started somewhere in the reservoir. I was the only diver in there, so it both confused and scared the crap out of me. Needless to say, I ran back to the hatch as fast as I could. I ended up getting my torch changed out and doing another hour in the water, but didn't hear the noise again. I still have no idea what it was, but the combination of my torch going out and loud banging coming from somewhere gave me a heck of a fright. Oh, his light is going out. I better bang on the ladder so he knows where it is. This isn't my story but my dad's. So when he was in grad school he did some field studies classes, some of which involved diving in Monterey Bay. One day he was diving counting something off of the Santa Cruz Pier and he finds a shopping cart with bricks and cinder blocks and a chain attached to the handle. He naturally followed the chain and found a bare foot wrapped in the chain. He assumes something probably ate the rest of the body, and apparently his friends had seen similar things too. Also not mine but my dad's friend. He says he was on a shelf counting mussels when he felt something tap his tank and he looked around and didn't see anything. He figured it was a seal cause they like to play. When he was nudged again he saw it was a great white. He says he thought to himself, if it gets me, I can't outswim it. Now I don't know if he was actually that chill, I sure wouldn't be, but that's how he tells it. I used to teach canoeing lessons to Boy Scout troops at a local neighborhood lake. Super small lake that's not very deep, but the bottom was hella thick with vegetation. The water was dark so you couldn't see your hands in front of you for more than like 5 inches under the surface. There was a small clubhouse, an open pavilion, and a playground all on the property. When doing lifeguard work in the water during a swim test, my sunglasses fell off my head. I dove down to find them and crap you not, I found a sunken, entangled hospital gurney at the bottom of the lake. It took a few people to untangle it, but how the F it got there was beyond me. Clearly it had been under the water for years. I've done a number of dives, and the strangest thing I ever saw was a large deep freezer with a heavy industrial chain wrapped around multiple times with about 5 cinder blocks attached. It was very rusted, and the deep freezer itself had to have been 30 plus years old, probably more. This was about 90 feet deep just off Vancouver Island, Canada. The situation gave myself and the other divers the newbie-jeebies, logged the GPS and depth coordinates and notified the police. We were able to find out what was inside, since one of the divers had friends with local police. 10 porcelain dolls. Nice work. You have unleashed them from the watery prison that was protecting us all from their wrath. When I used to surf, I spent a good deal of time underwater, whether intentional or not. One day, I went out in surf that was absolutely massive. For me, it was 10 foot solid all day. Bigger sets, serious stuff. And it was a very dark, overcast winter's day, and raining. You couldn't see crap above the water, let alone below. At this place, the bigger it gets, the further out on the rock shelf it breaks. So I was at least 200 meters from shore when out of the gloom towered an absolutely massive set. Enormous. As big as I'd ever encountered. There were only a handful of other blokes out there. The wave was mine. At this point I wasn't scared at all. No, I wanted to get the biggest wave of my life. So I tried. I got onto it, but I just fricked up the position of my feet, ever so slightly. No chance of pulling out. So I tried to go with it, and that is when it happened. The scariest freaking water-based experience I ever had. I fell off and this thing just took me to town. It lifted me all the way up and over the falls. I thought I was okay, but no, it was just beginning. It just kept pushing me down. Further and further. My ears hurt badly. It was completely dark, cold, even in a wetsuit. I came to rest on what seemed to be a very large, smooth rock. I could feel it with my fingers whilst I was pinned firmly to it. I was held there for what seemed like an eternity, maybe 10 seconds. But then I could sense with my feet a ferocious current that seemed to stop at the edge of the rock. It was trying to pull me over the ledge and down. I could hear it. At this point I was panicking. Seriously, I can't quite remember how I escaped. I have rarely been that scared in all my life. I made it to the surface. I really thought I was going to pass out. I can't remember much more, but I must have paddled in so freaking fast other people noticed. They came to see what was the matter. I just sat on the beach. I could not even talk. I'm getting the freaking heebie-jeebies even reading my own recollection. I've been pinned down before, but only by soft, relatively forgiving southern CA waves. Even the punishment dealt by the 1983 El Nino waves never had me hearing the hand of Poseidon. God, that's a terrifying thought. First time diving on Australia and first time diving with sharks. We start descending and the guide is at the front of the group looking for the sharkies. I'm at the back of the group. Suddenly I turn my head left and there's this 6-foot MF about a foot or two from my face. He just swam peacefully past the group. It was a bit creepy but lots of fun. He just wanted you in their school. I used to do a lot of night dives hunting for lobster off the coast of California. We'd start at 9 or 10 at night, so everything is obviously pitch black besides where we were pointing our lights. Every so often I'd get this unshakable feeling that something big was watching or following me. Sometimes I could quiet that part of my brain and continue with the dive. Other times I couldn't shake the feeling and would end the dive after a few minutes. It's a hard feeling to describe, but I guess I'd compare it to being in a haunted house but 50 feet underwater in complete darkness. My mom used to dive a lot. Florida Caribbean though, and she told me she used to get the same feeling on night dives sometimes. Not sure if it helps you or not, but she said on multiple occasions it turned out to be a barracuda hanging out over her shoulder using her light to see. Not a diver, but heard from old divers that worked for the Corps of Engineers that there's some huge catfish around the bottom of the dams, like the size of ants. There was a pretty cool show called River Monsters on Animal Planet a while back with a dude that would go around looking for giant fish that ate people. He caught a 5-foot long 161 pounds catfish in India once. I once went diving at Port Elizabeth, South Africa, where it is quite popular to see sharks. We begin diving and we are quite far from the shore. There's a cool looking structure under us. We swim towards it to get a closer look and I just start getting this cold feeling running through my body. And that's when a shark appeared and I physically shat myself from fear. Not a diver, but when I was surfing NZ's West Coast beach I felt something wrap around my leg, so I looked down and it was fishing line, so I tried to pull it up and then the line got heavy. I assumed it was a fish, but as I pulled the line closer it got really heavy and I began to sink, so I hopped on my board and paddled closer to shore. I slid off my board and was in chest deep water. My friend came over cause he noticed something was wrong. We both pulled the fishing line in and we saw a large silhouette in the water, so we dragged it to the surface and it was a dead body. Someone rock fishing fell off the rocks last week and was missing. There was a hook stabbed into his neck and fishing line wrapped around his face and dug into his skin. We brought the dude's body to the shore and called in the lifeguards, then threw up due to the lack of his eyes. This was a really interesting read. Sorry you had to see that, but thanks for sharing. I find the chance of that fishing line wrapping around your leg fascinating. You had to be in a certain place, at a certain moment, as the water moved in a particular way to connect that line to you. My dad is a diver and once he found a dead person that was deemed missing for quite a while. The guy was fishing with a harpoon. I'm not a natural English speaker so I can't use the correct term. And his harpoon was stuck inside the skull of a huge bass. He probably died because he didn't measure his breath correctly and the bass didn't die immediately, so he actually fought back and became the harpoon was connected in the belt of the guy's belt. He couldn't escape in time so he drowned. Point is, my dad discovered a half decomposed body of a dead person floating like a horrifying flesh balloon. Have a nice day. I feel terrible that your last sentence made me laugh so hard. I have 150 plus dive but can't say I've seen anything all that creepy. But I do have a cool dive story to share. I was diving the blue hole in Belize and we were at max depth, which is 120 feet. It gets weird at that depth. The light level is getting pretty low and it feels oppressive. You realize you're way down. There are some lemon sharks that swim around the blue hole. They are curious and like to check out divers, but they are harmless. They look mean as heck though and can get 8-9 feet easily. At 120 feet one of them decided to come check out me and my now ex-wife. She was a bit in front of me, but when she saw the shark beelining towards us she quickly swam behind me and shoved me towards the shark. I was not expecting that and it took a minute to process what happened, but I felt bad for her more than anything. She was terrified for a few seconds. I laughed about it later and said at least I knew where I stood with her. She is a good diver, but the sight of that 8-foot shark swimming straight at her with a mouth full of teeth triggered her survival instincts. I didn't hold it against her, as I got shoved towards the shark, who was at that point only about 6 feet away from me. He calmly turned to the side and glided right past me and then went on to check out some other divers. We started our ascent and I didn't see him again. It was a very cool experience. Didn't hold it against her now ex-wife. MHMM. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.